Williamson, and today we're talking with Kim Krause from the Schreiber Media Centre. Hi Kim, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Linda. It's nice to be on this side of the set for a change.
Can you tell us about the Media Centre?
How far back do you want me to go?
Right from the beginning.
Well, the first thing that happened is when I was in council, I was appointed to the library board. And that's when I got to know Donna. And of course, while we're having board meetings and stuff like that, we started talking about the idea behind having media literacy in the library, where people could go into a library and learn about media, learn about anything to do with media, whether it was be recording, camera work, all those kinds of things, how to use Facebook, how to use YouTube. And we both realized a few months into my tenure on the board with them that we kind of had a lot of similar history and backgrounds as well. She had studied filmmaking when she was in school. I'd worked in the film industry most of all my life, practically all around the world. And we started thinking about, well, how could we make this media center thing happen, where we could have something that the library could provide as a service for customers to the library. And the next thing that happened is she started looking for money. So she started going online, looking for different people for grants, as she does. We call her the Queen of Grants. And she had come across this company called Cactus. And they were going to be administrating a grant for a local journalist initiative. So we thought we would apply for it. Well, actually, Donna thought she would apply for it and see what came out of it. And we were contacted by them to attend a workshop. So this is about 2 years ago now. And both her and I flew down to Ottawa to meet up with these people. We spent a week doing workshops in Wakefield, learning about the project, what they wanted to do, a few little skills for things and what they want. And as soon as we got back, we actually decided that we had to now get this media center going. So it had to be organized as a nonprofit organization, or registered as a nonprofit organization, so that we could receive the funding. And one of the problems that happened right away is they realized that if I'm a counselor and I'm also a journalist, there'd be a conflict of interest there. So I had to make a decision to step down as counsel because I thought that this would be a really interesting project for the town. And I was thinking that it would be a nice tool for me to use my skills and for the library to tie in together. So I resigned from council in, I think it was February. And then right after that, we got the funding and we were supposed to start the project rolling. I think it was the middle of March. In fact, I know it was Friday the 13th of March 2020? No, what is it now? 2019. Yeah. So on March 13th, Friday, March 13th of 2019, we received word that all the municipal buildings were going to be shut down because of COVID. So all of a sudden, our grand opening for the media center basically fell flat in its bum. So we had to come up with other plans because we had just now got the funding. We got our cameras that were in place. We're about to start. How are we going to do this? So we managed to stumble through our first year. We had to use a lot of Zoom meetings and figure out how we were going to do this. Of course, the big problem was we weren't allowed to do any training. And part of our mandate for the funding is to bring people from the community in and teach them skills for training, to do filmmaking and audio recording, or whatever else they have to do, and working in a studio environment like this as well. So we managed to go through the first year, still producing quite a bit of content, actually, just by getting outside and doing things. But we weren't sure if we were going to do a second year. We weren't sure how things were going to change, if we'd even be looked at again. So we did apply, and sure enough, here we are now in our second year, and that's where it sits right now.
What kind of projects have you been working on, and what is the criteria?
That's an interesting question, because one of the parts of our mandate, because it was the funding comes from a local journalism initiative, and what a lot of people haven't maybe understood, but they'll get it now, is that any story that we do has to have some kind of civic journalism component to it. Which means if you were to call me and say, hey, my Aunt Betty knit socks, can you come and do a show about it? We'd all like to see it. It'd be a great show for a community channel, but unfortunately, unless there's a newsworthy aspect to it that has some impact on civic journalism, we couldn't do it. So of course, if she knit these socks and was selling them and raising money and giving them money to the food bank or to the animal shelters, then it's a story. So it's just weird. We've had to figure out how we can spin out a story where we can still feature the community in such a way, but make it so that it actually applies to the mandate of our grant, where we can actually spin it out as a funding story. The other part we have to do, of course, is every story that we produce has to have a matching, almost like a newspaper article text attachment to it. Because when these things are loaded on the portal, the text story has to appear with the thing. And again, that's part of journalism training. If you're trained to be a journalist, you're going to be writing stories. But it just takes a little bit extra long time. As a result, the hardest thing to do sometimes is to try and come up with that civic spin on a story, with that journalistic spin to make the story actually fit the mandate that we have for a funding. There's a lot of people that we'd like to talk to, for instance, for the Community Connection show that you do. And we've talked to people, but when we just bring somebody in and we say, okay, well, how was your life? Oh, I worked on the railroad, I'm married, I have 10 kids. That might be a really nice piece for the community to hear. And it's a nice historical piece and it's a nice biography per person, but it would never qualify for the civic journalism part of it that we get our funding from. So what we have to do is when we get a guest, we often try to figure out somebody like one of the guests that we had, and I think you did a great interview with him, was Burton Phillips. And because he worked in the oil delivering oil, technically that's the energy sector. So we were able to take his story about his experiences about how energy has, the use of energy has changed over the years, the delivery of energy has changed, the role of oil. And we managed to squeeze enough information into the interview that qualified now as a story about the energy sector. And again, it's not the ideal maybe way to go because you would like to find somebody first based on that specific story or make the story first and then the person. So whether it's somebody who worked on the energy board, someone who worked in the fire department, the challenges of somebody working in hospitals or something like that, and bringing them in to tell that part of the story. We can still tell a bit about the background story, but we have to focus on those issues. And right now, as long as we're under this mandate, we'll continue to do that. Hopefully at some point in the future, as we grow, we'll be able to expand a bit more and go into more what I call community channel programming. And that would be like bringing your old auntie in to talk about her socks, or someone who wants to say, has a show about a hobby that they have, any kind of thing. We could have that. People would love to see that, and it wouldn't matter. We wouldn't be fishing to try and find so much a story that's a news story. It would be more personality stories.
And something about the community itself.
That's what people are interested in. Like if you look at a lot of our stories, I'm not going to point any out because it wouldn't be fair, but some of our stories don't get the response we would expect. We're a very small town, first of all. So with 1,000 people, if we get 100 hits, that's 10% of the population. I mean, that's a pretty big thing when you think about it. If we were a town of 10,000, you'd have 1,000 hits possibly in that kind of a ratio. But we've had occasion where we've had over 1,000 views on some of our stories. And it's like, it's not just in Schreiber, it's touching outside of the town. So that's a really good point. It's a good thing because it gets out there and it touches other people and reaches other people. But some of the stories we might get 20, 30 views, again, depending on what they are, but we're not doing it for the views, we're doing it for that story. But it just might be that nobody's really interested in that story that you covered. And it's happened. We've done a show where it's like it's gone out, nobody really watched it. And then other stories, of course, the first year, most of our stories were Zoom meetings. And we did a couple of really good stories that were Zoom meetings. And some of them were well received because the information was good in there. And then other ones, people don't tend to sit there and watch a Zoom meeting for half an hour, just these faces on the screen. So what I've been trying to do is to try and just at least put a little bit of post-production into some of the stories. So we spend some time editing, spend a little bit of time color correcting, spend some time with the sound, trying to get it good. In some cases we can't because of the weather. And that's really how we produce a show.
Can you tell us about the steps that are involved in creating a show?
From the perspective of the Media Centre or in general?
From the Media Centre, like what are the steps that you need to do in order to create a show like we're doing today?
A show like we're doing today, we literally set up everything in the studio. We put some lights on, we put 2 cameras in, and you and I are having a chat. Easy to do. A little bit of editing maybe to get some of the rough spots out. But primarily, I would say, if you were to break it down, you would start with research. It's always about research at the beginning. You've got to look and say, what story are we going to do? Who are the people involved in the story? How do we contact them? Where do we get them? When do we get them? So a lot of that would be research. And for Schreiber Media Centre, a lot of our research is basically done by telephone calls. We don't go through volumes of papers or through stats and things looking for information because we're doing community-based things and everybody knows everybody, so you pick up the phone. You want to do a story about an event that's happening and you phone up the person who's organizing it, or you phone up the town and the town tells you if there's a certain event, if it's a municipal event of some kind. And so that would be your first step, to figure out where this thing is happening, what it's happening, who the people are. getting in touch with the people again, because we're a small town, is very easy. Everybody knows who everybody is. You can literally phone anybody up or just meet them in the street and say, hey, we're doing a story about this. Do you want to be in on it? So that's the first step. After research, we would go into a little bit of pre-production, and that would be how we're going to shoot the story, where we're going to shoot it. Are we going to do it in the studio? Are we going to do it outside? Are we going to do it inside at a venue? Whatever our options are. Then, of course, there's the third thing. Are we going to do it live, or are we going to do shoot everything and put it together in editing? One of the shows that we do is the Remembrance Day thing every year, and it's only our second year so far, but we do that live. And that's a completely different discipline than doing something that you know you're going to edit with. Often a story will come along that we weren't even aware of. So, and in fact, recently, the mayor, Kevin Mullins, would call me up and say, hey, Kim, something's happening. Would you guys mind covering it? Well, of course, we want to do anything for the town that'll help promote the town. And I would like to think we've got a good relationship with council and the mayor as well. So anything that we can do, to work together, they provide us with some information. We can help them with some stuff as well. So in those cases, community involvement works really, really well, because we have people who can maybe tip us off. There's a story happening, there's an event happening. We have to then decide if we can do it or not do it. But let's see, you've got, research, pre-production. For the production part of it, again, I think I mentioned we could be in a studio, which is the simplest way to do it, providing you can get the guest, book them in, and you're available, and David's available, and I'm available. So it's a lot of coordinating that happens to get them and bring them down here and do a story. For other situations, like I said, we would pick a venue and go and record it, so we can decide, are we going to take all of our cameras and shoot multiple cameras and then put a lot of time in editing? Are we going to just shoot one camera, take a lot of shots, and fix it up in editing as well? So that would be the production side of things. Once we've got shots in the can, as they say, or recorded, the post-production process starts. And for post-production, it can be a little bit tricky at times, because depending, again, the more cameras you have, the more footage you have. So it becomes trickier to tell that story. Certainly a single camera also has its own tricks involved, because you're stuck with just one shot, for instance. So the post-production, it's so variable. You can spend hours on a show, you can spend days on a show. And again, how long is a show? How long is a piece of string? Is this a 5-minute piece? Is it a half-hour piece? You never really know until you sit down. And one of the big hurdles with editing, of course, you're sitting down and you've got a rough idea of the story. But after you've looked at all this footage, you've got to try and make this decision. What's the first shot? Because the first shot is like, the opening chapter of a book. That's going to tell you what the next shot is, and how you're going to put the story together. So now we finished the editing part, so we've done the research. Now we've got to go and get it ready to be uploaded, because we use YouTube as our distribution system. Everybody practically does now. We don't have an actual broadcast center, but we put our stuff on YouTube and it can go around from there. So before we get it onto YouTube, I like to go through the show and just watch it once and make sure that it sort of feels all right, that everything's there. And that could involve anything from doing a little bit of sound work on it, adding music if we think it needs it. Not all stories have it. Just fixing up sometimes really bad audio. We still struggle with audio here because we just don't have, the expensive equipment and the ability to get up close to people with microphones that we would like to do. But we do spend some time with the audio where we can. Color correction to make sure that the cameras are matching. Often you've got multiple cameras and they all look different, so we'll spend some time fixing that up. And then, of course, the final output stage. So you've got to output it to a decent format. And then once it's uploaded, you've got to advertise it and let people know that it's there. So we'll then post the links on Facebook. A lot of the groups that we share on Facebook will also share the story. The Schreiber Hometowners is a very big one for us. Ray gets so many subscribers, and every time we put out a story and he links to it, you see the hits go way up, so that's great. Finally, you've got media management and just wrangling all that data, storing it, keeping it, archiving it, and keeping track of things. That's to do a basic show. That's just to do a basic show. Of course, some of the things involve me as the journalist going up and interviewing people. So I'll be the writer, the journalist, or the presenter, the producer, the post-production person, the sound guy. You wear about 12 hats in one thing. And again, hopefully that will change as we get more people involved. Right now we have at least 2 or 3 people that we can call up to help us with the editing, which is really great. David Costa, who's been training as a cameraman and a director. He's behind the scenes right now telling us what to do. He's also edited his first show, and he's coming along well as a director. And we just have to get more people from the community involved so that we can start bringing in people to learn about camera work, learn about doing some editing skills, and just lifting up those skills so they can tell their stories.
What has the community response been like?
People have been coming up to me and say, hey, I saw that show that you did about whatever, right? So that's really cool. And a lot of the times the comments we get are very good. We always get some pretty positive feedback. I don't think we've had one negative feedback yet. So I think we're making a little bit of an impact. One of the things that I'm particularly proud of is, as a community channel to get information out to people, anytime we've done a story about COVID or about the emergency medical services that were the proposed cuts, people have really reacted strongly to that one. And that was an interesting story because the mayor and the councillors got behind it to help us with the promotion of the story, to get it out to people. And that was one that was really, really successful story. I'm very proud of the way it turned out as well. It was a nice piece for the community of both Schreiber and Terrace Bay.
This video was a very important one where Carrie talked about what will happen to our communities and even the people traveling along the highways if we lose the right to have the ambulance in town.
Carrie had actually an episode where she required medical attention, and that led her to write a post on Facebook about the treatment that she got, good and bad, how that the staff were really great, but there was a little bit of confusion. Had she not arrived in time, she actually may not have made it. And then an announcement was made that the emergency medical services budgets may be cut in small towns. And we've already sitting with a situation where the towns are so far apart, and there's one ambulance per town, and the idea being if they were to cut that service anymore, that more lives could be in danger because of that. We actually need that services. And of course, because of the reaction to her Facebook post, she decided to write a story, pen a letter off to the city of Thunder Bay requesting that they don't cut the services and why, and how personally, and her story and what had happened to her. Which resulted in the mayor, Kevin Mullins, calling me and saying, look, we've decided there's so much we need to try and do here right now. We are organizing, the community of Schreiber and the community of Terrace, we're organizing what I would call a silent protest. They weren't going to be meeting up together like they sometimes do in this area with signs, but there was a call put out for every resident to hang a sign in their window or poster in their window saying, please don't stop our EMS services. And the response was amazing. Literally 90% of every house between Schreiber and Terrace had put up these posters, and some of them were drawn by kids, and it was really, 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 really interesting how it all sort of came together. So David Costa and myself and Carrie, we went out and we started photographing the windows of the different houses and the signs in the yards and stuff like that. And we went to Schreiber and Terrace Bay, and we spent 2 days actually shooting every single window that had a sign in every single property, and the ones in the yards as well. We came back with all this footage, and it was hours of stuff. I mean, really, there must have been 1,000 shots and photographs and interviews. We managed to grab some people and interview them and ask them what they thought of it. We put the whole thing together, I think it was over a course of about a week and a half with other, we had other things that were going on. So when we had a chance, we'd work on this thing and put it together. And the initial idea was to show a half-hour show about all the posters. We were going to dissolve in and out, show each poster, have each person talk that we had interviews with, and do just a general half-hour show or whatever we could do about this stuff. We had enough material. It could easily have been a half hour just if you showed every slide. And then we realized that what we wanted to do was create a shorter story that could be sent off to the city of Thunder Bay so that they could see the impact it would potentially have, and to see the outroar and the outpouring of the people that had the reaction that they had to the potential of these cuts that may or may not have happened. In fact, to this day, they still haven't been announced if the cuts are actually really going to happen. But it brought together both communities of Schreiber and Terrace Bay under the one wish to not have our emergency medical services cut. And that right there was a very powerful display of what media can do. And oddly enough, that was one of our most popular videos. It just went crazy. We ended up doing a follow-up story about it where we interviewed people and talked about the stories. We even did a third story talking to the chief of the emergency medical services to see to get his insight, just to talk about what services they actually provide, so people would be educated. Maybe they could understand more. This is why we're cutting, or this is why we have to cut. But
tell us about some of your favorite stories you've covered.
One immediately comes to mind, and this was a really strange one, because before we even had the media center, we had, I think, just put the paperwork through to set up as an organization, nonprofit organization. But before the media center even really technically existed, one of the first things that we did was we went to the Light Up the Night Festival. I think it was 2019. Was it 2 years ago?
Yeah, I think so.
And my sister knocked on my door and she said, "Hey, come on, we're going to go to the graveyard and we're going to watch the candle thing and whatever." And I had just coincidentally happened to grab a video camera, the old one that the library had, that I'd said to Donna, "I'll take this home and see if it works," because we were trying to put together a package, what equipment we would need, right? And we had this old camera. So I thought, I'll take it home, whatever. So it sat at home for about a week. And I just happened to take it on the way out the door. And my sister came and picked me up. It was 40 below that night, and I had no intention of doing anything. But I thought, well, I've got this, I'll take some shots. So we took a couple of shots of some things that were happening at the graveyard with the presentations and the singing and stuff. And the next day, I had seen, Councillor Mullins at the time, and he said, "I saw you had a camera there. Did you get any nice pictures that we could put up on the website for the town or anything?" And I said, "Well, I don't really know. I haven't even looked at it because I don't even know if it worked." I said, "But I'll let you know." So I went home and I looked at some of it and I said, "It's interesting. Some of the shots are grainy, some of them are dark, but there's something really interesting here. Maybe I should try and put it together as a film." So I ended up, after probably 2 or 3 days of playing around with the footage, we created the very first unofficial video for the Schreiber Media Centre, and it was the Light Up the Night thing. And people absolutely loved it. I mean, it was all done almost accidentally, all on a whim, but people really, really liked it. So I said, well, that's interesting. We're onto something here. If we're getting that kind of a feedback from something, we're not even up and going yet. We were still 2 months away from even opening the doors. I said, this is a good indicator that we're doing something right.
So this video was very emotional. And even though I was present, it's still watching it gives me goosebumps.
Yeah, it was. There was some initial bad reaction to the idea that people were going to the graveyard to do this kind of thing. And I get it, the whole thing about disturbing a graveyard or whatever. But the thing is, the way it's been presented is it's supposed to be about not mourning the people we've lost, but about celebrating them and lighting these lights at nighttime to bring some joy and some hope to people, and to take time and stop and remember those people that were there and the joy that they brought you. Just because it's in a graveyard doesn't mean it can't be an uplifting moment for people, and it certainly was.
It was like your loved ones were a part of your life again for that few moments when you lit the candles.
Yeah, it ties it all back together. I think a lot of people got that feeling about it. Yeah. Of course, this year we did Light Up the Night again, part 2. We had a year in between because COVID, we couldn't do it last year. So we did the Light Up the Night this year. And the same response again. People just love it. It's a local story. It shows the people there. It's a very warm, loving piece. Even when you're editing it, you feel that you're creating this story that's touching people. And sure enough, if you read all the comments, how touching, how lovely. So it actually does exactly what it was supposed to do. One of the things that I did that I was a little bit proud of at the time was we had to do, it was the beginning of the COVID stuff. And I was able to gather all the mayors up from the North Shore for 6 different municipalities and get them together in one Zoom conference and have a discussion about how all of the municipalities were going to be impacted by COVID and what we were all going to do about it and how we work together. That was a little bit of it was a real news kind of a story. It wasn't particularly a fun story, but it was interesting technically how we got it together and how it all happened and the information that was out of there. Another story that we've done twice now has to do with charity in a small town. The first time a local band toured around and they went in the back of a wagon all through town, again during COVID, almost like touring minstrels, but on the back of a wagon, and they raised money for the food bank. And that was a really, really good cause because it showed the community working together and how people were doing things for the community. And we ended up following slightly different lineup in the band this year, but we ended up following the band again this year. And it was a horrible rainy day, but they went out anyways, tied to the back of this truck. And they performed songs around town to raise money for the Legion this time, because as you know, the Legions have been suffering across the country. They weren't allowed to open, so the revenue was down. Some of them were even closing. So the Legion was very grateful that they could have this. And the very interesting part about that story is Thunder Bay Television News, they usually come to Schreiber and try and cover stories. And that particular story they had missed out on because they weren't available to come down and shoot that. And I don't think they even were aware of it. And they found out that we had footage of the thing. So that when they did their story for the news that night, 80% of the footage was from us. So that was really great. It was a nice collaborative thing. And we're trying to maybe do more of that kind of work right now where we can work together, where if we shoot something for them or they've shot something that we could incorporate into our stuff as well. So
it's a great partnership.
Yes, and building those partnerships is very important to the mandate that we have. They actually are on us all the time. Build partnerships. We also now are not regularly, but when we can, submitting articles to the local newspaper, because that also counts in our favor, and we can put those articles in, and it helps the paper because, quite frankly, a lot of small town community newspapers are suffering right now, and they just don't have the content, they don't have the resources. So it's we basically supply them with the story.
That's great. Is there any other partnerships throughout Schreiber that you have?
Yeah, actually, quite a few. Obviously, the one with the library. If it wasn't for the library, we wouldn't even be here. We operate out of the basement of the library. The senior center has been a very, very good partner with us because Kathy Carlino, who's the program director over there, or programmer, I guess, whatever, program coordinator, she ends up calling us a lot to cover anything that's going on. They work with the gardening group, they work with the seniors and any projects they might have and stuff like that. And the nice thing about it is when we do a story like that, it helps us because we get some stories, but it also helps them. It promotes the senior center. Is
there any other communities that you work with?
We do a couple of things in Terrace Bay. We did their fall fair last year, which was really nice. With Pace Flat, it's been really interesting because the July 1st celebrations, it wasn't really a time for celebration for a lot of people. So it was interesting to get the perspective from people in Pace Flat about what they thought about it, and especially in light of everything that had been happening at the residential schools. It allowed us to get a nice focus on something that was different from that. And then, of course, another interesting thing involving the Pace Flat part of things was the high school kids had all gotten together early this fall, the beginning of the semester, to start the season. And they all went out there with funding from a grant to rebuild the bleachers that were out there. So that was an interesting story because we got to show what it was as the high school took the kids out to live in the community for a weekend in tents and then go out and experience and learn about the culture. And that was really interesting for us to do as a show because now we've got something to show people how communities work together, how organizations work together. And that's what we want to do. We want to work with other organizations and committees.
One of my favorite stories that you did for the library was the Spin to Win.
Oh, well, any wonder because you were in it. You were like the Vanna White of the whole event.
That's not why I liked it. I thought it was very funny. It was very well put together.
That was an interesting show because we had trying to come up with ideas where we could do live productions. And the other thing that had happened was because of COVID, there hasn't been any bingos or penny auctions in town forever. And in Schreiber, in a small town, everybody goes. Whenever there's a penny auction or a bingo, everybody goes. So we couldn't do any, like in Contact. So we talked about the idea, well, can't we use the media center some way and the technology to try and put on a virtual penny auction? That was the original idea. Well, we couldn't figure out how we would do a penny auction because we need to sell tickets. We'd have to mark items, do all this stuff. So we thought, why not have a spin to win? We'll get some prizes donated, which we did. And it wasn't no serious big things like giant screen TVs or tractors or nothing. It was like little goofy items. One of them was a piece of wood, I think, one of the prizes. But at the time, the price of wood had gone up, so it made sense. And we managed to get, I think, 15 or 16 donations for prizes. And then we sat down with Ray Giannette, and we thought he'd be a great host for this program. So we convinced Ray he should host this show, right? And we thought we need a co-host. We need somebody, our Vanna White, who's going to be presenting the gifts. Well, you were the obvious choice, and you did a wonderful job. It was so funny.
Thank you.
The rapport between Linda and Ray, it was just hysterical. We did a rehearsal, and unfortunately, we should have aired the rehearsal because it was really over the top. And the interesting thing about it as well was we knew people were watching because at one point we got a phone call from the Golden Rail, and Mark Houston had called us and said, do you guys want some hamburgers? So they had been watching this whole thing and seeing the events been given out and everything else. And the nice thing, of course, people were watching it because they want to know if they won a prize. and what the prize was, and you were showing the prize, and Ray was spinning the dial. And at the same time, he was giving out information about what was going on in the community. So it was a really neat interactive show, and it was fun to do, and I really hope we do more of those kinds of things.
Actually, the girls were listening to it as they were cooking in the chip stand. So everybody that was standing outside of the chip stand waiting for their food was also listening to it.
So that's how they knew it was going on. But that was really great. And of course, we were just about wrapping it up, and Mark walks in with a box full of food for us, which was really, really well appreciated. But those are things I think that happen in a small community. And being able to be part of that was really, really special. And I think I've always said that the whole thing with the media center is we should be able to use it to not only just show news all the time and not be, harping on negative things and bad things, but use it to promote goodwill within the community. Use it to create a platform for information sharing. There's even a chance, in some funny ways, that we contribute to the economic development of the town, because I've always thought at some point as we build this thing, we may host a small mini film festival one time. And if we have that, people are going to be coming here. They're going to be using the restaurants. They're going to be using the hotels. So we actually can help, contribute to the economy and to the culture of the town. We're also preserving memories and stories of people, which is very important in small communities. So, and there's no other real small communities like ours, like we're less than 1,000 people, that are doing the kind of thing that we're doing. And I'm very proud of the way that we're doing it and how it's worked out so far.
I think it's important to the people of Schreiber to preserve their history and to keep the stories alive. And I think that we're doing that, definitely.
And we have a lot of stories.
Yeah.
And definitely. A lot of characters.
Yeah. How did the story come about for the Mural Project?
We heard that these murals were going to be put up around town. So we contacted the municipality to say, well, where were they going? When were they going up? And, what was the project all about? So we went out and followed the crew as they started putting them up on the walls. We had a nice interview with the mayor telling us about what the project involved, how they selected the artists that were selected. Then we also talked to Economic Development Office to talk about the potential of the project to attract visitors and tourism and what it would do. Especially with Heritage Days coming up this summer, they will be able to partake in a virtual tour of what I was calling an outdoor art gallery, basically. So you can go and see all the different paintings. All of them have been imprinted with a QR code, which can be scanned from your phone, and you can learn about the artist and the area that you're in and where the next painting is. So it'll take you on a virtual walk of all of this artwork. And I think that's a very interesting concept because you're using technology as a tool to promote tourism and to also highlight and showcase artists and culture in town. I think being a railroad town, we sometimes just focus on the railroad and all the, it's tough work and it's a tough job and it will made the town. But it's nice to be able to take a break from that and just look at the cultural aspect. We have so many talented people who are artists and musicians, and to highlight them and to show them what they can do, I think it's very important. It's a big part of the culture of the town.
And we have different cultures that live in town.
Yes, the one that comes to mind right away, which would be obvious in a town like Schreiber, is the Italian community. They're avid gardeners, so whenever Kathy Carlino from the Senior Centre or Donna from the library calls and says, hey, we've got a story about Italians and gardening, well, we're on it in a heartbeat because they just love it. And this year we were allowed into some of the gardens, to see some of the gardens that they've grown, and also to go into our own community gardens, which is managed, I believe, by the library, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, it is. It's called the Little Sprouts Community Garden.
Mm-hmm.
So if anybody wanted a plot, you come to the library and we're able to assign a plot or a garden box.
Mm-hmm. And that story as well was very well received because a lot of people didn't even know we had a garden there. Some people had written comments on the YouTube page and they said, where is this place? It's like they never knew about it. It's been there for 20 years. Mm-hmm. So by highlighting those kinds of things, it's very good. Other community organizations that we work with, we do try to work as close as we can with the clinic, the medical clinic, as often as we can. Recently, we were called out again when the Pfizer rollout began for us to not only let people know that it was happening, but to cover the event and the story and tell people about what was going on. So those are all really good things that you use the media center for. It's for getting information out there to a wide range of people.
What would you like to see for the future of the Schreiber Media Centre?
Well, I'd like to see us first just continue and then hopefully expand on what we've done so far. It was always my hope when we got this going after our first year that we'd be able to turn it into something more than just reporting on community events. That we can actually, at some point, have it where we're involved so much with the community that the community are producing content, that our stories get out to a wider audience, that we bring other people in to share stories with. Like I mentioned earlier, film festivals would be wonderful to host. Pie in the sky, hope one day, and again, it would be a legacy project for me. Obviously, I'm not young enough to keep doing this anymore. It would be to have an actual, maybe even some small studio set up somewhere in a building where we have a teaching facility and people are coming in and out and doing things, and really highlight the fact that even in a small town, we can do just exactly what larger centers do. We have the creativity, we have the people, and I can't see any reason why the size of our town and its geographic location would be a negative thing or anything that would deter us from doing what we want to do. I mean, the world that we live in now, everything is connected with technology. You've got large corporations moving people out of big centers. I think it's possible that we could be a role model for other smaller communities, that they should start embracing these ideas. I mean, I think we're a little bit ahead of the curve in a lot of ways, considering that we're this small little dot on the map. But I think you're going to see more people, hopefully, taking that concept of getting people involved in your community, telling their stories, sharing their stories, getting it out there on the worldwide scale, which is what we have now. We're not limited to just local broadcast anymore. Some of our stories, I should mention this, we've had viewers from as far as Australia, South Africa, Europe, into the States, and further, pretty well around. I mean, it's quite funny when you look at the tracking, you know, obviously a lot of local people, but there's enough relatives and offspring and family of the locals that have moved on and are somewhere else now, but they're still watching these stories and they're still connecting with the community. And I think that's been that would be one of my big sources of pride, is that we can still connect with people when they're not here. We can still let them know that, hey, Schreiber's still standing. We're actually probably in better shape going forward than we all believe we are. And I think we can help contribute to the growth of the area.
And the thing is, it doesn't matter where they live, Schreiber will always be home.
Exactly, yeah.
Thank you for coming and joining us, Kim, and it was very interesting to find out what you do and how you do it.
Thanks, Linda. It's been great sitting with you in person rather than looking at you in the screen next door. And thanks for giving me the opportunity to let people know what we're doing and what we're about.
Thank you again. So if you want to see more of the new videos that are produced by the Schreiber Media Centre, check out their YouTube page and share and subscribe. Thank you, Kim, and thank you everybody for watching.